Battle for freedom. So this panel is going to be all about occultism, which for anybody who isn't familiar, that word literally just means hidden. So we are going to be trying to reveal or demystify some of the hidden traditions that we find in our world. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up three of our most awesome speakers. We have Max Igan from the Crow House, Mark Passio himself, and Derrick Broze. They're all going to come up and talk to you guys about occultism. Derrick! Come on, motherfucker. All right, cool. So you guys got two mics, so you can all pass them around.
Cool.
All right, cool beans.
Hey, folks.
All right, so first off, just introduce each of yourselves and what the word occult means to you.
I'm Mark Passio of whatonearthishappening.com, and what the occult really is knowledge of the human psyche and knowledge of the actual laws of nature, both the seen physical laws that can be measured with scientific instrumentation, traditional scientific instrumentation, as well as the unseen spiritual laws that are all about morality and behavior and govern the consequences of behavior, that is not known by the majority of human beings. These laws are not known by most people. Most people are completely unaware of their existence and operation. And these laws are hidden deliberately by a class of individuals that I would refer to as a priest class of dark controllers that want to maintain their power differential by either hiding this knowledge or dissuading people from looking into this knowledge so that they can extort their ignorance and thus create a power differential over those ignorant people. That is actually what the occult is.
Well, I don't really know how to improve on that, but I mean, the occult, really the word means hidden. It's that which they have hidden from your senses, hidden from your view, secreted away for their own particular purposes. Really? I mean, what else can I say? Mark pretty well covered it there. You can go with that.
No, I think Mark did cover it. The only thing I would add to that is, and this is something I hope we can explore throughout this panel, that occult does not mean something you're ignorant to. You know, because there's a lot of folks I've seen, and sometimes from a religious conservative background, who think that everything that is not their particular religion is satanic or is occultic or is the Illuminati or whatever. Occult does mean hidden, but there, as Mark just illustrated, there's some very specific things we're talking about.
Awesome, guys, awesome. So one of the things I've noticed is that it's very, very hard to, one, talk to people about this, but then two, get them to understand it or at least have a grip of what the concepts are. Why do you guys think there is such a resistance to learning about the occult and learning about the occult's influence on society?
I would say people generally fear that which they don't understand and don't have a working knowledge of. And also there's a lot of social engineering that goes into the obscuration of the actual definition of the word. You saw in the documentary screening last night that when we asked people on the street, in the person on the street interviews that we conducted, what does the occult mean to them, they either had no idea or they thought it was about voodoo, palmistry, evil, etc. They had no actual working understanding of what it is. I think the second part of why people are very resistant to understanding it is they either have an atheistic mindset or a complete absence of spirituality in their lives in many cases, and they think because they think that way that other people's belief systems cannot actually affect things in their lives. And I always give the analogy that just imagine like radical religionists, right? A group of absolutely fanatical right-wing Christians that want to, are so fanatical about ending abortion that they would do violence to people at an abortion clinic. Now imagine if they were going to shoot up or bomb an abortion clinic, okay? Radical, right-wing Christian terrorist types, right? would it matter whether you agree with their belief system? Would it matter whether you agree or accept their religious beliefs? Could their beliefs, if acted upon, have an effect on you in the very real physical world and have an effect upon your life? Absolutely. People it seem to be brainwashed to think that just because you don't share someone's depraved, often sick, religious type mentality, that somehow means that ideology has no bearing on your life and cannot affect you, and it's simply untrue. And this is what I think we have to do a better job explaining to people. The dark occult belief system, you don't need to share it for it to have an impact on your life, because this is the religion of the rulers of the world. Dark occultism, at least. We're taking light occultism out of the equation for the moment, but we're talking about the psychological resistance factors. When I try to explain to a lot of people, the occultists are a priest class that are really running things. They sit enthroned behind the ostensible power structures of government, banking, military, etc., who's really running those organizations, high-level intelligence, high-level religion. These are really occultic. It's an occultic priest class that has knowledge that the average person does not about how things really work in life. And they'll say, I don't accept that, I don't believe it. And the other part of it is, a lot of people will not open their worldview to something that they have not experienced themselves. This is what part of my struggle, at least, is in getting people to understand this. I have to realize most people have never and will never have any experience with these types of groups of occultists / sick religionists. It will not happen in their lifetime. They will not get involved in any type of group that practices these types of beliefs and practices, okay? So in order for them to understand it, they would have to do enough research to accept it from some third-party source by reading about it, hearing about it, talking about it, discussing it. And that's not the best way of learning. That is a way of learning about something. But of course, we all know the best way of learning about something is direct experience, direct knowledge, gnosis. However, do we have to put our hand in a fire to know that it's hot and it's going to burn our flesh? Not necessary. So that's the balance that has to be struck. Most people are not going to get directly involved in the world of occultism, or especially dark occultism. Most people will never be tapped to be involved in that realm, in that world, because the occultists will not want to tap upon their power, their characteristics, their skill sets. They invite certain people into this fold, and some people are born into it. So there's all of those factors play into the psychological resistance of people for not wanting to understand and accept that this exists, it is real. There are many people who are involved with it. They want to keep it as hidden as possible, because to expose it is to begin the process of leveling the playing field of information, which they rely on people's ignorance to keep exploiting them and thus stay in power.
Real quick, if you have a license plate GCL 3193, you are blocking the food entrance of the venue. White Toyota. So anybody with a white Toyota GCL 3193, go move that shit. Sorry, guys. Go ahead, Max.
There's so much programming in our society with so many people, and even when people get into this whole so-called truth movement or this resistance or whatever, even the New Age cult, all of this stuff, like put it all together, they're searching for information. They're searching for what they term enlightenment. But they don't understand what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is, as was once said by someone, a breaking down of everything you thought was true, everything you thought was real. It's a very, very destructive process. And the problem is that people have a failure to process certain forms of light. Light being information, and that which is hidden from them, all this what they call dark stuff is not dark stuff. It may be negative, but that's the emotion they're putting on it. These are real problems that we have in our society that could be very, very easily healed if people were willing to become aware of the problem. But they're just not willing to look at it. Now that's not part of my reality. Where attention goes, where energy goes, or attention goes, energy flows. You're creating it by acknowledging it. Well, you know, these people who run the banking system, who run all these lines that people have to walk between every day. So whenever you participate in walking between those lines, you're giving energy to that system. Where attention goes, energy flows. Yes, you're empowering it by not looking at it and by participating in this system and doing everything these controllers tell you to do. And it's your failure to process certain forms of light, information being light. You know, you walk into a dark room and the room is dark, you can't see what it is. As soon as you light a flame, it gives you information about the room. So light is information, you understand that. That's what enlightenment is. It's finding out the truth, finding out the real information, and that is that which is hidden. And that which is occultic is that which is hidden from you. That's what the occult is, that which is behind the veil. And that might seem very dark to people, but it gets darker and darker because you're giving it your energy by walking between these lines all the time, and you're not simply turning and facing the shadow. And if you were to light that flame in that room, the darkness flees. It doesn't matter how dark a room is, you bring the tiniest little piece of light into that room and the darkness is gone. It doesn't matter how much darkness you bring into a light room, it doesn't make any effect at all. But people aren't simply willing to shine that light and to see information as being light. And they call themselves on a path to enlightenment, but they don't want to process certain forms of light. That's a real problem. And there's so much programming. There's people thinking if I can change the world by becoming a better person. Well, yes, you can, but part of that becoming a better person is living up to your moral obligation of that which is happening to your brothers and sisters around you in the shadows that you're refusing to look at. That's the problem, you know. And people need to put down this fear of looking at this, because as soon as you put down that fear and look at it, it flees. It cannot function in the light. None of the stuff they do in the dark, all these terrible things Mark talks about, they do it away, secreted, hidden, because people won't look. All they have to do is look, and they can't do it. It's really that simple. So it's breaking down that fear, that barrier, that obstacle of looking at that which you really don't want to face. Like I said last night, you've got to be able to get through life. The trick is to be able to face infinity without flinching. Anything is possible, you know, and you can face it and go, aha, there it is, and move on. Now I have that information. But if you're not prepared to get the information, you'll never be able to move on, and we'll never get out of this mess. And that's why people won't look at it.
I have to keep following them up, so it's going to be fun.
We'll start with Derrick next time.
No, but so the question is, why won't people look at this, right? That's basically what we're getting to. Yeah. So obviously, as Max said, the programming is a big part of it. And I think even within, because what we're at today, this type of event and events that are happening like this in recent years are really the merging of the truther kind of conspiracy research communities with the anarchist community, with the crypto community, with the spiritual community, the psychedelic. It's a lot of merging. We're not just one community here, right? So we don't all agree on everything, and that's why it's beautiful. But I know that there are some who still have a hesitance or a resistance to accepting the things we're talking about, that occultism does have a role to play in our world. And that's by design, of course. I mean, these things that's a Hollywood movie. You're watching too much TV. You know, or that's what people used to believe before we had reason, before we had logic. You know, those things don't exist anymore. Now it's hidden. So people are programmed to believe that these types of things don't happen. One thing here, does everybody here understand that we are creators, that we are constantly creating? Does everybody understand that? And whichever level you accept that on, like whether you mean like you can create and build a new crypto, or you're creating through your words, through your emotions, through your heart, right? So we understand that. These folks who practice, you know, dark occultism, dark shamanism, these practices, they understand that to a degree that probably some of us don't. And they understand to use that in the ways that most of us would never dream of doing that. We think of, I want to create love, I want to create friendship, I want to create beauty, I want to leave something that is a legacy. They want to leave a legacy that, as Max was saying, that's something dark. And, you know, if we don't add light to that, well, then it's going to remain in the dark. The other thing is, does everyone, again, on any level, understand that symbols rule the world around us? Now, symbols, and I mean this whether you're talking about the Target, the McDonald's ad, what I mean by that, so even if you don't think there's some spiritual or esoteric or occult symbolism or meaning attached to the symbolism, when you see a McDonald's golden arches, it triggers emotions, thoughts, memories, etc. inside of you. All of these different things do this, and we're constantly surrounded by them. Now, if you understand it on the level of actually studying these symbols and seeing how they are connected to various secret societies and groups like that, then you understand on another level. But no matter where you're ready to accept it at, you have to understand that we are constantly creating as as human beings, as living beings, and that symbols are all around us, and that letters, the words and the symbols we use to communicate are nothing more than that, symbols, and our words are just putting that into the world. So this stuff is already all around us. We've just been conditioned to think that it only the fantasy side of it is something that happens in Hollywood, that happens in storybooks and fantasies. These are things that we were told as children. It's time to grow up and realize that that world doesn't exist. And also a part of the occult, and I think you guys might agree with this, is they put it in our faces. So by putting in Hollywood, putting in these kind of things, it's almost a way to sort of mock us, and at the same time to get people to think it's just a fictional version of reality. That's not real life. So it's all around us, and because of those various things, people won't listen. And I do find, again, even within anarchist communities and other communities of people who are questioning certain systems, they have trouble going to this particular area. They're resistant to it.
Awesome. All right, this one's going to start with Derrick, and we're going to work in the opposite way. So sometimes when you get this deep into the conversation and you can get people to start listening, a lot of times what you get hit with that is sometimes difficult to answer is well, my friends are doctors, and my friends are lawyers, and my friends are politicians, and they're not evil. They don't do this occult stuff. Is everybody in on this big conspiracy? Do you know how many people it would take to keep this conspiracy covered? How do the occult manipulators of this reality make it so that this goes so unnoticed by the very people involved in the institutions? Or do you think that the people in the institutions on every level are involved? Can you touch on that dynamic?
I think it is one grand conspiracy, but not in the sense of every single person is obviously not every single cop is involved with different things going on. I mean, in Houston, I've investigated cops involved in human trafficking. I've had evidence of that, but I know enough to know it's not every single cop, right? For example, but it is a grand conspiracy in the sense that it infects and affects every aspect of our reality. How do you make that happen without, like you said, people are like, hey, somebody would speak out, or, it would involve millions of people to make this happen? It really wouldn't. It really wouldn't. And like Mark said earlier, not everybody's tapped on the shoulder to be in this, so it's not everybody. But if you get a certain amount of influential people, say again in Hollywood and pop culture and in government and in these various forms of authority, it always comes back to authority. You can affect a lot of the world just by being influential. Think about how many people open up to brand new ideas and ideas that might be controversial or might even be detrimental to their health just because they heard their favorite pop singer talk about it or post about it on Instagram or something like that. So it's not really that especially in the age we're in now of influencers and followers. And we know now that they don't want people to be influenced and following these sort of ideas and these sort of things. That's why we're getting suppressed and censored. Instead, they want them to follow people who are either already a part of the machine or are unknowingly pushing out the symbolism, their own symbolism, So I do think, it affects that. But it's also like 1984. In 1984, they didn't necessarily need guns that pointed at every person's head. You create the culture, and after a while, people are blindly submitting themselves. People play a role themselves. You don't necessarily have to scare every single person into submission. They just like to follow. I mean, we all see this, right? There's that whole societal peer pressure thing and people who are just afraid to question. So you only have to create a certain amount of control, I think, with, I don't know what the special number is. Some would say the Council of 300, right? Things like that. I don't know what this magic number is of how many people are involved in this to various degrees, but I think there's a lot of people who are unknowingly participating in these systems and keeping them going without realizing it.
Oh, there are millions of people, like most of the earth is participating without realizing it. But the thing is, when you get human consciousness and you squash it and you take everything away from people, then you can create a system like this. I mean, a lot of people would enter politics believing they can make a change when they enter. They'd enter the police force because they want to solve crime and they want to stop crime. But they end up in that club. And when you've taken everything from people and you give a little bit of power to someone within that group, then that person sort of puffs their chest up a little bit. They feel like they're a little bit special, and they're willing to push the boundaries a little bit because they feel like they've got a little bit of authority. When you do it in a political sense and in a sense of the police as well, I mean, You know, people enter into that political realm, they start getting a few kickbacks, they can buy a bigger house, people start respecting them around the neighbourhood, and they start puffing their chest up a little bit. And they're in that political club, you know, and it's this club mentality. And it's the same with the police, you know, the police might enter the force and they want to do the good thing and they want to stop crime, but they get in there and they put these uniforms on. And the uniforms are covered with all these occult sigils and symbols. You ever notice how all the militaries around the world all wear the same uniforms? They all got 5-pointed stars and red ribbons and all these sigils. These are all occult symbols. These are all people that are marked for a certain purpose, marked to do a certain thing. And you can go into a military store, go into a military disposal store, and find an officer's uniform and put it on and see how you feel. Or go and put on a police uniform and see how you feel with it on. You feel different. It creates an energy field. And when you get in that club, you're in that club. You might be a good cop, a good person, but you're with a group of 10 people who start kicking the shit out of some guy and you join in. You put the boot in a couple of times because you're part of that club, you're part of that energy. And if you don't, you get ostracized. And it's the same thing with the politicians. They start losing their kickbacks. They see a little bit of corruption, but they turn a blind eye. You know, the system is inherently corrupt from the ground up. It's got a corrupt core kernel in it. So you might enter in there and you become corrupt by default, which doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're dysfunctional. You get a corrupt file on your computer. It's not a bad file. It's not an evil thing. It's simply dysfunctional. And the system is dysfunctional in that way. So people get in there and, you know, if they get to a point where they've got to a position of real power, you can bet damn sure they know what's going on. Because the system will reward sociopathy. Whoever's willing to step outside the line and keep the people in tow a little bit, we'll promote that person, make them a CEO. We'll make them the manager. We'll get them a little bit further up the food chain because they're willing to do what we want them to do. And then all you got to do is brownstone them after that. You get them to a little position of power, take them out, do a brownstone operation, film them with an underage prostitute, and you got them in the pocket. And the first thing I'm going to get you to do is go and get your 10 most influential friends, and we're going to brownstone them as well. That's what they do. So, you know, when you get to a position of high authority in any of these situations, you find they're all compromised. But a lot of the people in the lower sections are not all compromised. They've actually entered these realms because they want to make a difference very often, but then they get seduced by the economic gains that they get via their position. That's the problem. Like I said in my talk yesterday, even when voting, most people vote with their pockets. You know, politicians can come along and promise all this stuff, but whoever gives the most tax cuts is who the people are going to vote for. And that's the situation that we've got. So, you know, you can't just hate the whole thing and think that everybody in there is corrupt. Some people do enter with the best of intentions, but they're entering into a system which has a corrupt core kernel, which is going to find that little piece of sociopathy in them somewhere. And when it finds it, it's going to nurture it, and it's going to bring that out. And if it can corrupt them and get it over to their cause, then it's going to do that. That's the design of the system, unfortunately. You know, but ultimately, it's because we support it. We support the whole thing. You know, authority is a fiction, folks. You know, who the fuck are you people again? You know, what did you want me to do again? You know, we never asked that question. That's the problem, you know.
Yeah, I think people have a hard time understanding that it doesn't require a whole lot of people to turn people over to evil ways. The few can control the many relatively easily, again, because of how they exploit people's ignorance. That's number one. Two is slavery is ancient, ladies and gentlemen. It's been here for as long as human beings have been here. It is nothing new. The idea of human freedom is a new idea relatively in the course of history. Slavery is ancient and has been going on since we've existed. So you have to understand that the people who have controlled humanity since humanity has existed on this planet have accrued a tremendous amount of wealth by stealing it, okay, over the course of human history. This is what is often referred to as old money, okay? They call their religion the old religion because it's been around since humanity has been around, because that's how long slavery has been going on for. And, you know, this old money is used to keep the house slaves of the system in line. The people who are doing what the bidding of this small group of sick psychopaths who work through a system of hierarchy and compartmentalization. That's another aspect. The very structure of the system is part of what allows the few to control the many. hierarchy, ranks, in other words. Those at the top know way more than what's going on to people way down at a lower rank. And then compartmentalization. You keep people doing separate tasks so no one really understands what the overarching agenda is, okay? But, how many people in the world, we have to not just place the responsibility on the few, okay? The order followers and the house slaves, as I call them, the police and military, if you really think about it, there's like more than 1 million people in this country involved in some form of the control system, directly, not even ancillarily or indirectly, directly. Police, military, people directly working for the prison system, etc. Okay? All of them are doing what they are doing for a paycheck. And because they'll say, this is all I know how to do, this is what makes money, this is what puts food on my table, this is what feeds my children. Okay? They don't care whether it's moral or not. That's the ultimate problem. The ultimate problem, what really keeps these few people in, is because the vast majority of the human species will do immoral behavior for a reward for themselves and their own. And that is where the responsibility needs to be firmly placed. See, I've too much, I think, in my work talked about how responsible the highest level of these dark occultists are. Because it doesn't matter who they are or who's in control. If people continue to follow what they want them to do because they're thrown their scraps, then the situation will continue indefinitely. That's really what allows the few to control the many.
This actually leads right into my question that I wanted to ask you from the beginning. The first time I met you, you mentioned how advertising and advertising agents are often using this hidden occult knowledge to influence us without us even knowing. And you told a pretty interesting anecdote about Betty Crocker. Yeah. I want to know, maybe you can cover that, and then
sure,
anybody can jump in after, but I thought that was a really interesting point.
I always tell left-brained, they're usually ultra left-brained skeptics that have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, as I like to say. They don't believe in religion, so they've thrown spirituality out with it. And they don't understand that there's a very deep, hidden aspect to the human psyche that resonates at a core spiritual level that these sick, twisted, psychopathic occultists that are running the world know all about, and we know nothing about. I give them 2 examples, pragmatic, real-world examples that most people have never heard of. And that is one I call the Betty Crocker conundrum. And then the other one is called Obama's fainting ladies. Okay? So if you look these 2 things up, I just tell the left-brained skeptics among us in whatever community I'm talking to, if you look these 2 things up, you will understand that is the occult. And that's specifically the dark occult. A real-world example of how to change people's thinking by seemingly magical means where you didn't really have to do anything to them, you just needed to know knowledge that they do not know. Okay? So the first is Betty Crocker conundrum. Betty Crocker's back in like the 30s or 40s, I think it was the 40s or 50s, they had an instant cake mix they wanted to put on the market and sell in supermarkets. And when they did all this research and development, came up with the formula for the cake mix, boxed it up, put it out in the supermarkets, it just didn't sell. It was an absolute flop, and they wasted like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay? No one was buying it, and they didn't know why. Okay, they thought it was going to be an instant hit because housewives throughout America were going to say, oh, look, this is much easier. I could bake a cake now with much less work and time involved and save myself time. And, it's still a good tasting cake. And, they would love it. And it didn't work out that way. They hated it. They didn't want to buy it. And the company had no idea why it wasn't selling. So what they did is they went to psychologists to try to understand why the cake wasn't selling. And this is what the occultists are. Occultists, dark occultists, are ancient psychologists that are absolute master psychologists that come out of the ancient world. Okay, it's a bloodline of master psychologists that have come down through the centuries into the modern world with deep deep-seated knowledge of how the human being really works at a fundamental level that the vast majority of people have no idea. Okay? So they hired this team of psychologists to figure out why the cake mix wasn't selling. And they went in and did the research and understood the real deep psychological level of why housewives throughout America were not buying the cake mix. And they went back to Betty Crocker and said, we have the solution. All you need to do is add some instructions on the box, a line of instructions. You don't even need to change the cake mix formula. It will sell after you add these instructions to your box, your packaging. And it was one line of instructions that simply read, add an egg, add 1 egg to the mix. And then the cake mix flew off the shelves. So how is that possible? How would it be possible that you put 3 words on a box and then you completely change the reaction of human beings from discarding it and not wanting it to suddenly giving their money and buying it in droves? This is because they leveraged the power of deep psychological knowledge called archetypes. And they understood that the housewives were feeling guilty. That was the psychological problem that had to be overcome. They were feeling guilty for taking a shortcut. That's why they didn't buy it. They said, we used to make our cake from scratch for our family, and that was done out of love. And we want to have effort involved. We want to have care involved in the baking of the cake. And to do this made us feel like we're not involved in that process anymore. It was all automatically done for us, and that was like a shortcut, and they felt guilty about it, and that's why they didn't want the instant cake mix. They wanted to put the care and energy into baking the cake because they felt love as a result of doing that. Okay? So how did add an egg change that? It psychologically assuaged their subconscious guilt by putting the archetype of feminine creative essence, the egg, into the process symbolically. They were giving of their creative essence, the feminine egg, okay, to the process of baking the instant cake. And then suddenly, psychological guilt was assuaged because of inserting that archetype in the formula, in the instructions. That is the occult. That's the occult. The occult isn't men and women dressing in black robes and going into a forest and sacrificing animals by a bonfire. That's not the occult. The occult is understanding how the mind works and either helping to elevate it to an enlightened level or exploiting the ignorance of other people through that knowledge. So that's an example of dark occultism in the real world, you know? And then they actually got people to buy something that they really didn't want. And that's how that works. Now, the other one is Obama's fainting ladies, okay? This one's harder to find now. It's like kind of been scrubbed from a lot of video sharing sites. During Obama's presidential campaign in early 2008, there were plants in his audience that would faint at an appointed time during his speech. At all of his presidential campaign rallies, it would normally be a woman that would be in the middle of the crowd. It was part of his campaign, and she would pretend to faint. Okay, this is what's called a false flag operation at a low level. This is a problem reaction solution event. What Obama would do is immediately recognize that it was happening because he knew when it was going to occur. They would have it scripted according to what he said. And at that time he said it, the fainting would be feigned, okay? And then he would be the first to recognize it. And then he would immediately stop his speech, regardless of what he was saying or how important it was. And then he would say, oh, it looks like somebody just fainted. He'd be the first person to point it out, okay? Make some space for her. Here, give her some of my water. Okay? So what does that do in the minds of the people? It makes everyone think, look at how attentive he is. Look at how caring he is. Look at how smart he is. And he goes, oh, she's probably just a little faint. Well, how did he know she didn't just have an aortic aneurysm? Right? Somebody just went down in the crowd. How do you know they didn't have a massive stroke? Right? But suddenly he has the knowledge. She probably just felt faint. She's going to be fine. Just give her some water, make some space for her. So he is attentive. He's knowledgeable. He knows exactly what to do, and most of all, he cares. That's the occult. That's how it really works behind the scenes to leverage power. And that's the thing most people in the average community all around us, that would be the exact opposite of what they think the occult is. They would think it's, what Hollywood depicts Satanism as. That's not Satanism, and that's not the occult. What I just explained to you is the world of the occult. And that's what we have to know and understand. That's why this movement isn't making as much headway, because we're not understanding that that's what occultism is.
I just want to add to that. Yeah, go ahead. Mark, you brought up, like ancient psychologists. I think that's really an important point, because it all has to do with psychology. Is whether you're just thinking in terms of the U.S. government having unlimited resources and people like Edward Bernays, 70 plus years ago, understanding the human psyche and how to manipulate it and how to get people to buy things that maybe they don't even need or want. Like, that's what it really comes down to, is being aware of these unseen forces that are influencing your way of thinking. And so much of the things we see in the media, controversies, scandals, et cetera, are just scripted. These are scripted things to make you feel one way or look this direction or not this direction, or talk about this and be offended by that. So it really does come down to that subtle thing, which I think brings back the importance of just knowing yourself, getting to know your own heart, your own mind, and being in tune, and being able to take things in and say, okay, use those critical thinking skills, like, is this bullshit? Does this fit with the truth that I know? Or is it something that needs to be rejected or just completely ignored?
As a brief addendum to that, you mentioned Edward Bernays, who really bastardized and perverted some of Sigmund Freud's psychological practices. I just want to recommend 3 great documentaries. Check out Century of Self, which is a phenomenal expose of that. Check out Psywar, P-S-Y-W-A-R, Psywar, and check out State of Mind. These are all about this type of mental manipulation and mind control that is part of dark occultism. So those documentaries can help you to understand that dynamic.
Totally agree with that. If you want to see Century of the Self, there's actually a link to it on my website. I've had it sitting there in my recommended viewing for the last 10 years. It's a great thing. I don't really think there was a question in there, so I don't really know what to say on that. But what Mark was saying about the manipulation through those 2 the anecdotes that he gave you, think about that on a world stage. Realize the fact that all of these governments work together. You got one criminal cabal which has insinuated itself over human consciousness and is masquerading as the heads of all these governments. And when you look at that little charade that they had at the Obama election with the fainting ladies, think about Trump visiting North Korea, the first president to visit North Korea, which is a state set up by the CIA after the Korean War. I mean, what was all this about? All this theatre happens on a macro level as well. So, pay attention to what's going on, folks. It's all scripted, the whole lot.
I'd like to add a brief addendum to what Max just said. Regarding Obama's fainting ladies, if you can find the video still, okay, and you watch it, this practice stopped immediately after videographers caught it and strung them all together in 13 sequences to show that it was happening over and over and over again in a scripted in the exact same fashion. And that goes to Max's point of, if we shine light on this, they can't get away with it anymore. That's when they had to stop, because too many people were catching on that this was a tactic used to get support for him psychologically.
All right, that's great. Hey, how about, can we get a round of applause for this? You guys are getting a download like fucking insane. This is wild. All right, so we've now pretty much covered a lot of how dark occultism works. So a lot of times people get to this point and they get depressed or disheartened or feel defeated. And that's not what we're going to send you home with. We're going to turn this around and get into something called light occultism. Guys, why are these guys doing this? What are they hiding from us? And what are they truly afraid of when it comes to our ability to harness the occult? to free ourselves?
I'll take that first. I'm glad you're bringing up this, what we're referring to in the moment as light occultism, which again, understanding that occult just means something that's hidden from public view, maybe kept to a small circle. So as far as why they would be afraid of that, I'm going to answer that, and also I'm going to share just a brief story that I think relates to what I was saying earlier about understanding that just because you are maybe ignorant of a certain practice doesn't make it an evil occult practice. So part of my family comes from a Native background. In the last few years, I've spent more time learning from the Choctaw in Oklahoma as well as the Lakota, and I myself, my family is Seminole. And so the more I've started to participate in ceremony, particularly in Sundance, which takes place every June around the solstice, and the particulars of the ceremony, if you search online, you can find some people who maybe have shot some YouTube videos or people who will write about it, but typically that is completely discouraged. It is what you would consider to be a cult because it's hidden, because it's knowledge that not only have Native people have our ways like smashed out and smothered out of us through the boarding system in the US, and indigenous people all over the world, Australia, everywhere else, have been abused in this ways, but we were taught that we couldn't speak our own languages, that we couldn't practice our own traditions, that we had to cut our hair. So it wasn't until the 60s and 70s here in the U.S. with what is known as the Red Power movement, when natives started to grow their hair long and do our traditions again and keep, bring back our dances and things like this. But a lot of them were kept alive in secret and changed and kind of adopted. People would literally find hidden rooms in a house to just try to get a quick Sundance out because they felt like it was so important for us to be connected to the spirit, and the government was trying to, smother it out of us. So these are what you would consider occult practices, and they take place all around the U.S. Different tribes lead them. As I said, I've been going to the Choctaw, what's known as the Choctaw Eagle Sundance, and it involves, for the people who are dancing in the inner circle, without sharing too much, it involves fasting, going without food and water, dancing in the heat of the sun, day after day, doing what is known as sometimes as a vision quest or rites of vigil, going out into the woods, being alone in the elements for days without food and water. And it ends with a practice of piercing your chest. And there's also a day of offering where people give flesh offerings. They maybe cut a little sliver off your arm and tie it with your prayers with the tobacco and praying to the spirit of tobacco, and you tie that to the tree, to the prayer tree. So my point with sharing these things is to say that I know that there's folks, and I've seen this through my YouTube channel when I've talked about some of these things, there are folks who maybe come from not just a Christian perspective, but just a conservative religious perspective, who would see certain things like that and say, that's satanic, that's evil. And these are traditions that are older than their traditions. I'll say that. I've been around for just since the beginning. We've been connecting. We're all indigenous, for one, so it's important to know that we all come from an indigenous background, and our ancestors, whether you're from Europe, America, whatever, practiced different things, and these things were suppressed from us. That was the original colonization of our minds, is taking away what I would consider light occult practices, being connected to the earth and being in tune with this planet and all the energies that it has. Then those were suppressed and smothered out of us, and instead now people are fighting over the Abrahamic religions. Now, whatever your beliefs are, I think that it's just important to understand that. I just wanted to make sure that me being on this panel, that it's important for me for people to understand that traditions that aren't familiar to you, and especially earth-based traditions, spiritual traditions coming from the Native community, they look different, and they are hidden for a reason, because they tried to kill us. They tried to take them away from us, and so people had to keep them hidden from these people who have these dark practices. And so they do exist, and they still exist. And so to answer that question, that's why they don't want you to know about them, because they are more connected to the earth. They are more in tune. In our community, cell phones and things like that, EMFs essentially aren't allowed near the arbor, near the Sundance area, and you take off jewelry and things like that, because there is a belief that it interferes with the spirit's ability to be able to communicate and to connect with us on that level, and also that it's a distraction, that why dancers are supposed to be tuned into the tree and praying and connecting to that energy for 4 days, while they sacrifice and give to the community for 4 days without food and water, that shiny jewelry and cell phones and these kind of things are all distractions, and that it's meant to just, you give back to the community. So I just wanted to share that I think that to me is what light occultism is being in tune with the planet around us, the energies around us, the things that have been suppressed, that we've been severed from, and that also our digital age in many ways is disconnecting us from what I would consider those light occult practices.
I think that you know, if you really want to look at it, what it is stepping through fear. That's what we have to do. That's how we'll change everything, is by stepping through fear. And to think there's certain things they don't want us to know. There's certain things like these shamanic traditions, that's a real threat to them. They don't want us to know that sort of stuff. But when you look at the so-called truth movement and the way we reveal a lot of the corruption, they want people to know that. There's a process called the externalization of the hierarchy. Yeah, there was a book written by Blavatsky about that way back when the Lucis Trust first started. What is the Lucis Trust, which was first the Lucifer Trust? What is Lucifer? The bearer of light. What is light? Information. You know? They want people to know how corrupt the system is. That's why they let the truth movement grow. That's why they made 9/11 so obvious, because they wanted to see who would get it, because they were fishing. Because that's what the internet is for, the international net, the World Wide Web, you know? And they want people to know just how bad the corruption is, because when you think about this, it's all about fear. It's all about stepping through fear. And if this is a soul test and it's a test of morality, you know what good and bad is. How much are you prepared to take? How much corruption are you prepared to see before you're prepared to say something about it? Because by externalizing it and making you all aware of it, but that by walking between these lines, doing what you're told, you are supporting all of this corruption, you're supporting all this pedophilia, all the stuff that you know exists, but you're still paying your taxes, you're still participating. So therefore you become a willing participant and supporter of this corruption by becoming aware of it and failing to do anything about it or even say anything about it. And therefore you condemn your own soul. That's how it works. And the way to get through that is to step through the fear and have no stake in the outcome. What are you scared of? Death? Well, you're not going to stand up because you're scared they'll kill you. You came here to die. It's a given. You're going to die, folks. What is the mental state that you're in when that happens? How much corruption and how much of your soul were you prepared to sacrifice before you stepped through that doorway? That's what light occultism is, folks. Step through the fear. What the fuck are you afraid of? Who are these people?
And you know, it really is about shedding fear of death, because, that's the ultimate unknown, right? That's hidden from us. We're all going to go through that doorway at some point. And, this is what the parent tradition of light occultism and what I would refer to as the Western mystery traditions is all about. And that parent tradition is shamanism. I would say that's the oldest form of light occultism. Light occultism contains the same knowledge as dark occultism. That's the first thing people should know, is that this is all the same knowledge. As a lot of speakers talked about, a lot of things are a dual-edged sword. It can cut both ways. What matters is the consciousness of the wielder of the tool. A sharp knife can cut vegetables to make a healthy salad for a family. A sharp knife can also be used as a murder weapon. It's the same tool. Knowledge works the same way. It's all about what is the consciousness of the person who is wielding the tool and what are they going to use it for. So the first thing I would say is light occultism possesses and is comprised of the same knowledge as dark occultism. It is just how it is used. Is it used for the uplift, betterment, and enlightenment of humanity, or is it used to control, manipulate, and enslave humanity? And then I would just add that I think people really need to understand that dichotomy and difference between these two ways of using this knowledge, but then explore some of what I would consider the more potent modern traditions of the Western mystery school of thought, or simply light occultism. And the ones that I have found the most powerful, aside from shamanism, like shamanism is probably the most direct, because as Derrick was talking about, they're going to use methods, direct physical methods, to get you into a modified consciousness, an alternative form of consciousness, and that's going to be done through rhythmic breathing, dance that puts you into an elevated state.
Drums.
Psychedelics, exactly. Drumming, yes, exactly. Rhythmic beats. And there's many other techniques and methods for doing that. So that's going to really be the one that's going to have you the most connected to a direct experience of gnosis. However, as I've always talked about, we don't have to get knowledge through the total direct physical experience of a thing Like, again, you don't have to grab a hot iron bar to understand that molten metal will burn your hand, okay? So there are methods of getting that knowledge indirectly as well. Now, I would always recommend working with your actual self, and physicality is going to give you the most direct approach. And this is what, the shadow work is ultimately all about, okay? But there are many other light occult traditions. There is Kabbalah, which is one of the roots of the Western mystery traditions. There is Freemasonry, which builds upon that tradition. There is Tarot, the tradition of actual interpretation of the art and allegory on the tarot card deck. There is Rosicrucianism. There is Thelema. There are many other occult traditions that you could look into and explore and find one that resonates with you. For me, in my life, Freemasonry, Tarot, and Kabbalah were the ones that really helped me to truly understand the potential of the light occult, okay? But what do all of these traditions share and have in common? They have one overarching thing that they have in common. They are all, at their core and at their original intent. It doesn't matter what they may have changed into or devolved into over time by people, working their way into the system and exploiting them, okay? Because there is infiltration of dark occultists within these traditions. You don't need to join any organization to learn this. This knowledge is all already in the world. It has exploded onto the world already. We should be, with the amount of information that has been revealed due to the existence of the internet, already in a deep occult revival, a light occult revival. Unfortunately, fear is holding us back from doing that, and a misunderstanding of what the occult is holding us back from doing that. What we have to understand these traditions all share in common is at their core and original intent, they are ultimately teaching one thing, and that is natural law. They are teaching what the real difference objectively in nature, the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior, moral behavior and immoral behavior. All of them are allegories, metaphors, symbolic interpretations, a system of correspondences that all teach us about what is going on within ourself and ultimately teach us about objective morality and natural law. And that is why dark occultists don't want you to know anything about the occult. And that is why dark occultists obfuscate in our minds by repeating it over and over and over again that the word occult means evil. That's why they do that. That's why they don't want you to know, because that knowledge of objective morality and natural law will level the playing field, and it will be game over for their control system if that becomes common sense knowledge in the wide body of humanity.
One more round of applause for our speakers. Hell yes. Guys, we have a little bit of time left, so we're going to open it up. Do any of you guys have questions? I see one of my favorite people over there.
All right. I hate to be a broken record. I'm not saying it's organized crime. But it's organized crime. Can you guys talk a little bit? So, when I say organized crime, I'm using the definition broadly. It's people that will use deception, that people will use violence, that people will use extortion to steal resources from some people, and then they will take some of the profits and they'll invest it in hocus pocus, monopoly tricks. How do you control people? How do you control people using religions? And so I'd like for you guys to, and even, like, I'm not a big fan of David Igan, I'm a fan of some of his work, but even if it's aliens, it's organized crime aliens. They'll use violence and extortion, and so number one, I'd like for you guys to address that. And then the other thing I wanted you to address is we talked briefly, or Mark was talking briefly about slavery yesterday, and what I try and tell my kids is the difference between being enslaved and being a slave is resistance. And I'd like to get your comments and your thoughts on that. So, thank you. Okay, I'll take this one first. It is all organized crime. That's what these people are. They have no moral legitimacy. Their whole system has no moral legitimacy. That's what most of us recognize, but that's what we have to teach the rest of humanity. That it doesn't make a difference how long this has been going on for. It doesn't make a difference who has been doing it. It doesn't even make a difference what their methods have been to keep it in place. The thing to understand that it is morally wrong, and we should not be willing to accept it and allow it to continue. Regardless of what that means, we have to do. But the easiest way of stopping that is by not participating in it, by refusing to do anything that gives any amount of energy, as long as that is within our power to stop that flow of energy to these people. You know, and that involves not using their banking system, not paying taxes, not buying into their forms of, so-called health, entertainment, all of it, education. We have to withdraw from those systems. It's about saying no, And the other thing people have to understand, like Philadelphia is a big city that's known for people in organized crime, mafia, okay? And we have to understand that that's just this same system being run by the higher level occultists. You don't think that the highest level mob bosses ultimately report to them? They control all the organized crime syndicates. The intelligence agencies work with them at the highest levels. They ship in all the so-called illegal drugs, set them up as things that you aren't allowed to ingest, so that they can, get people using them and then put them in their prison industrial complex cells, so that they can make more and more immorally obtained money, and people will go and take those jobs. We have to appeal to people's sense of morality. If they think they're a good person, they need to stop working within this system. I continuously tell people the real solution is, if you're involved in government in any way, you need to quit that job. And increasingly, that extends to more things because they're really subsidiaries of government. Modern education is a subsidiary of government. Public schooling, that's a subsidiary of government. Modern medicine is increasingly a subsidiary of government, if not a wholly owned subsidiary of government, And ultimately, government is a subsidiary of the dark occult, as are all of the other organizations I'm talking about. And as Howard said, it's all an organized crime syndicate. It's one big cult. That's what we have to really understand, that we're talking about what we are up against. We're not up against a political system. We're not up against a financial system. We are up against a cult. A cult took over the world already, tens of thousands of years ago. And that cult is the organized crime syndicate that Howard's talking about that runs the world. And it's one big cult. That's exactly what it is that's running things. And all you're seeing in physical manifestation, when you talk about whatever these systems of corruption are just tentacles of that one big cult. That's all they are. They're arms of that octopus.
Yeah, Howard, I always have to give you credit for putting it that way, because I really think organized crime is probably the most succinct way to explain, what's going on, and it really gets to the heart of it. And as Mark said, mafia, crime bosses, organized crime, there's intelligence connections. They're interwoven with government agencies and with the people behind them, the group, the cult behind them. Even on the Epstein case, the more I dug into that, you find going back to the guy who gave Epstein his money, Les Wexner, who owned Victoria's Secret, who runs these fashion shows, who runs The Limited, comes from Columbus, Ohio. He's interwoven with the Columbus Mafia, and they're interwoven with intelligence. It's the same group. They're just different pieces of that. And what journalist Danny Castellaro, who some of you may have heard of, in 1992, he was suicided because he was doing deep work and investigating surveillance and investigating what he called the octopus. And one of those cases where he just slashed his own wrist 12 times and all his stuff disappeared. But people have been trying to expose it. It's the octopus. It's a crime syndicate. It is organized crime. I think that really is the perfect way to put it.
Yeah, I call it that all the time. I even did a radio show once. My show was called Government is Organised Crime. But that's the way it is. The world is run by criminals. It's racketeering is what it is. In its most basic form, it's racketeering. You think about it, people think if we didn't have governments, we wouldn't have roads, we wouldn't have all this stuff. But the government doesn't build that. That's all companies that do that. The government sits above the top, and it just racketeers the whole thing and takes a cut of everything. That's what it is. It's a worldwide system. And when the people start, arcing up a little bit, well, they just manufacture a war. Hey, let's have a war, And the people think that it's real. It's all theatre. If there was a real war, You know, like if Trump wants to go to war with Iran, then the White House should go to war with whatever building it is in Iran that they keep the government people in, and they can have their war, you know. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. The whole thing's racketeering, folks. And we pay protection money through taxes and all this stuff. We'll pay you taxes. Just go and bomb those other people over in Yemen. Leave me alone. Don't bomb us here. We'll give you money. It's racketeering, folks, pure and simple. We just got to stop it. If you look at how the mafia's run, that's how the government's run. It's the same thing. There's no difference at all.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
Okay, this message is for Derrick and Max. Derrick, you have long hair, and Max, you don't. I've heard the Native American thing, like they take these guys and they shave their heads and they completely kind of like have a different experience of life because they've like lost their connection. But Max, you seem pretty well connected. You don't have much hair, and so do you, Derrick. So I just wanted to hear from you guys if you've heard about this anomalous thing that goes on.
I used to have really long hair. Like I had hair down to my waist. And when it started falling out, I grew a beard. So now I've got long hair on my chin. So I'm just keeping the tradition going, you know. It's just the way it is.
Can we get some pictures of those of Max with long hair?
I did. I had really long hair.
So yeah, there is the native belief, and I think others have come to this similar conclusion that our hair is an extension of us, and that our hair is a living, being. It has our memories in it. And I've been growing my hair for 3 years. I had my hair long before that. Some of you saw me before that, and I actually shaved my head because I got out of a really tumultuous relationship and time in my life, and I wanted to start fresh. So I did my own kind of cleansing ceremony, shaved my head, I burned my hair, let those memories go, and then I've been growing my hair since then, and this has everything I've done for the last 3 years since then. So yeah, our hair is powerful, I do think, but I also think, as Max said, like hair on the chin, hair on the chest, hair wherever else you got it. I know that it's like a controversial thing for some of you guys. Some of you ladies might not shave your armpits, and other people look at that like that's weird, but at the same time, when you start thinking about it, we're just animals and we have hair, and it's all an extension of who we are. Maybe that's part of the programming too, getting us away from our own natural essence and the memories and the connection that's within our hair. Explore that connection.
Okay, one more thing for all you guys. To get out of the system, Mark, I think you mentioned, don't participate in the bank system. So what do you actually do on a practical level? Do you just operate with crypto only? And this is for all you guys, because I know, Max, you have some interesting ways that you deal with money too. And I just want to know, how do you get out of the system other than just deal with crypto? Because you can't send somebody $100 sometimes.
Utilize it as little as possible for you to live and survive. I put enough money in an actual bank account to actually pay like utility bills, and that's about it. Everything else, cryptocurrency, PayPal, cash, that's it,
Yeah, I did. I don't own a credit card, and like the only thing I've ever bought with a credit card, well, I've got a debit card, and I keep like $20 in that account unless I need to purchase airline tickets, and I put some money in there and use it. I just use cash every way I can. I just refuse to use anything smart. I don't use a smartphone. I don't use a credit card. I just won't do it. I mean, I'm getting led into it. That's the problem. Is it's getting almost impossible for me to do things. But I've been holding out as long as I can. I mean, we just do what we can, brother. Like Mark said. I mean, all I've got in my own name in the real world is a driver's license, car registration, a bank account, and a passport. I don't have any utilities in my name. I don't have any of that sort of stuff. So that's my only connection to the system. And every transaction I make, I use cash, so it's untrackable. So I mean, we do what we can. Ultimately, we like to get rid of the cash as well. I mean, why should we even have to pay to be alive is the question. But it's getting that out of people. And speaking, Mark was talking about the Kabbalah before. If you look at, money is this Kabbalistic thing that creates this dependency. It creates a barrier between you and reality. You can get an island culture who's never heard of money, who get on fine. You can introduce money into that culture. Within one generation, they won't know how to function without it. That's just the way it works. So it's a hard thing to get out of, this necessity to pay to be here. But just use their system as little as you can. And even with what I always keep warning people about with the smart grid and everything that's coming, it's the apps on your phone, like I was saying in my talk yesterday, I think. It's all these little conveniences. That's the problem. You can still have the tech, but don't get led into a position where you're losing your life skills. That's the problem. We've got to maintain 1 foot in the tech and 1 foot in reality.
Yeah. No, good answer. So I want to just add a little bit to that. And yeah, like everybody's kind of already said it. There's no perfect answer yet, right? So even those of us who are advocating these things can't 100% do them because of just the way things are structured against us. But you limit your involvement with their systems as much as possible. And to what you're saying about apps and things like this, they're getting you through convenience, through comfort, all these sort of ways. I don't use a phone at all anymore. I mean, I've just kind of stopped using the phone recently. And that's just me. Honestly, I was a late adopter. I didn't use cell phones till like 2010. I didn't get a smartphone until only 3 years ago because I needed it for one of the outlets I was writing for. They wanted me to start live streaming, so I had to get a smartphone. And I've just given it up now, and it's interesting. People try to text me or call me, and they're like, I've been calling you all day. I'm like, oh, well, it's like an answering machine. I get to it when I can. I remember those days when I was a little kid. And I kind of prefer it. I'm less stressed out. I'm less plugged in. I don't need to know every notification of everything going on. When it happens, I can get it later and catch up. So yeah, that's interesting for me. It's helping me unplug. And money is kind of the same way. I don't have a bank account. I haven't filed for taxes since 2010, and I never filed as an adult. My parents had been, filing for me, and even after I was old enough, my mom was still like filing on me or whatever. But once I started to get it into filing for myself, I decided just to not do it. And from what I've learned, you're actually better off that way, as opposed to filling out a fraudulent form, where then they can say, oh, you filled out our form and you lied on it. But if you just don't give them any of your stuff, I just don't, pay them anything. I don't even bother with them. I think you're in a different situation. And also, I do personally live a very meager lifestyle just from the way that I prefer to live. And so I'm not making a lot of money anyways. It's not like I'm making millions of dollars doing the things that we do here. So anything I get is either coming in through cash, crypto. I do have a debit card, like PayPal debit card. So I'm using the PayPal system. I don't like PayPal. I don't like Peter Thiel, but that's, a way that people are able to send me money. So there are limits to what we can do outside of that until we get to a place where we're not paying for our own existence. We have to survive within this mechanism until we create that community or that part of the world where we can exist in alternative forms. As we're exiting out, we're still going to have to use it to some degree. And even then, I think there's degrees of it, right? You're either, on one hand, the extreme, you're totally opted out of their system. You're not even touching their money. You're maybe full crypto, or you got a gift community going on, gift economy, or barter, or you're just growing everything you need. You're making everything you need. That's the ideal, right? And then you go from there. Well, I grow some of my food, but I still have to use cash to go pay rent, right? Or I have to still, pay some bills, so I got a bank account, or different things, right? So and then some people are, I got 10 different credit cards, I've got debt, and I've got all these different bank accounts, and I got a 401k, and you're totally plugged into the system. For me, the goal is to start taking step by step to getting yourself away from that. And that's going to be different for each of us. And some of you might be like, you know what, honestly, I'm okay with my bank account. Personally, for me, I don't want people who robbed the world in 2008 and have been screwing up the planet for the last 100 plus years to have any of my money. I don't want to give them any of my service. That's just me. But again, we have limitations. We all have different goals and different lifestyles and aspirations, so it's going to look different for each of us. But for me, the goal is just see where you're at, see where your goal is, and start taking steps there, because if you don't even take the first step, you're never going to get there.
All right, I believe we have one more question from the audience.
All right, I may be barking up a wrong tree here, but I just want to throw it out there because I haven't heard anybody really touching this one so far. I've been doing a little bit of research myself for unrelated, similar issue, I guess. But I see a lot of these problems going back to the agricultural revolution. I mean, when man started, let's say, growing crops and cutting down instead of just hunting and gathering, getting their resources
Yeah, I think that farming practices have really grown into like what has now become big agri, which is very destructive both to the ecology and the people. But I think the best studies have shown that medium, not extremely small, but medium organic plant-based farms would probably do the best in the type of civilization that we have now to help transition us over to something more sustainable. I think also growing locally, buying locally, that reduces dependence on shipping food back and forth and using what they call fossil fuels and participating in that whole economy that's based on the petrodollar. You're limiting that to a certain extent by buying locally. But I also think that the slaughter of animals is a huge part. I mean, how much material and water that takes compared to plant-based, farming practices, is doing a tremendous amount of damage. That's one of the reasons. That's an ancillary reason I became vegan. I became vegan mostly because I want to eliminate suffering in the world, and that extends beyond just human beings to the animal kingdom for me, because I'm a lover of animals. So I tried to, I wanted to remove the internal inconsistencies in my mind, in my mental makeup about, caring and loving animals versus, using any of their, either flesh and or byproducts, to sustain myself, because I realized that was not necessary to maintain optimum health. I've lost weight, I've gained muscle, I've gained a lot of energy. I feel like, as even like Gina Carr said, that the aging process has slowed or even quote unquote reversed, and physically have never felt better. So I think there's lots of ways that we can improve upon what we're doing wrong in regards to agriculture. And again, that's also a stepwise process, but it's like first learning about what the problems are, and then taking action to try to move in that direction. I don't think just farming plants is necessarily a bad thing. I think it can be done right, it can be done wrong. How we're doing it now with the type of profit motive that is used in farms, how they're not letting soil recover, they're not rotating crops, they keep depleting soil, etc. There's so many different ways, the types of pollution through runoff, which can be improved. There's so many different ways of improving it that if those were all done, it would really look completely different and not be the system that we have now. And I think that's a stepwise process of transformation from doing something in an unsustainable, incorrect way to a sustainable and moral way.
So I'll just be brief. I know we're low on time here. So response to that, it's this, essentially I think what you're getting at is the idea that once man started at the current agricultural system, we became sedentary, we stopped being nomads, and that's when, everything got wrong. Along with that argument, I've seen, and I think there is something to it, that what happened once we stopped traveling, doing our thing, looking for food and following the animals and things of that, essentially, and following the seasons, we started to box in land, and you had land ownership, and then you had private property. And I know that in this particular community, a lot of folks in today's present world recognize the value of private property as far as if you're going against the government, you're like, no, this is my private property, you can't just enter into it. But again, coming from a native perspective, it's something that I've sort of battled in my own mind of, listening to people that I've been very inspired by, particularly John Trudell and others, talk about how our traditions before the concept of private property came along, that we were just free with the earth. And all of us, whether you're native to America or whatever part of the earth that your ancestors come from, that we existed on this planet, we weren't paying to be alive, we were just living in harmony. And of course there was conflict, obviously there was still even slavery in some of these times, and there was battling between tribes, but we were more connected to the planet. So I've seen this argument that, agriculture, private property, land ownership, all of these things started around the same time and maybe led us down this path. I think that in the current world we are in now and moving towards a sustainable place, as Mark is talking about, something that is important to look into is, of course, the concept of decentralization, decentralizing and localizing our food production system, because most of us, whether you're in Houston where I'm at or over here in Philly, we're dependent on food being grown in California, food being grown in Mexico. That's where it's traveling all the way across the country to get to us, to make sure that our grocery stores are stocked with whatever we want, whenever we want it, because we think food just grows every season all year long. because we're disconnected from the seasons and eating in season and eating local and these kind of things. So as we're decentralizing, if we localize through more community farms, more urban gardens, more backyard gardens, all this type of stuff, we end up with food that's coming from our backyard or coming from your neighbor's house or down the block as opposed to somewhere else. So I think that's part of the answer, decentralizing our food production system, but also looking to permaculture, because permaculture is a completely different way of doing everything. I mean, it's not just about food, it's an entire way of looking at life, and it's a philosophy of life, but it definitely has to do with the way we produce and grow our food instead of monocropping and destroying the soil and destroying the planet and being very invasive. You learn to be in balance and in harmony with the earth when you're starting to grow your food and to build your shelters and these kind of things. So for anybody interested in that concept, I would look into decentralization and permaculture.
Yeah, I'd say permaculture, and the fact that permaculture isn't being taught in schools and isn't being practiced in our society shows that your government's corrupt, folks, shows that they're full of shit and they're a bunch of criminals. Because, this could be a food forest, this whole town could be permaculture, That's it. Where would the problem be if that was allowed? But it isn't allowed because people think authority is real. So, that's it. And I've always found if you want to do this sort of stuff, folks, it's far easier to get forgiveness than permission. So just do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Passio, Max Igan, and Derrick Broze. Let's hear it for them. Ladies and gentlemen, that is fucking it. Thank you so much for coming to the inaugural Anarchadelphia. I'd like to bring my partners, Sonny and Pat, on stage. And I just want to thank these guys for making it happen. Without one of us right here, none of this could be possible. Thank you guys for coming. We appreciate it.
I'll do the rest.
Oh, wait. Pictures. Oh my God, pictures. Smile, everyone. Somebody say something, it's so awkward. Thank you guys, thank you.
Derrick is going to be having his workshop at FDR Skate Park at 4 o'clock, so you could catch Max's right here. We're going to partition this off. Yeah, so you can, if you bought both, you'll be able to enjoy both. But then we have to move down to FDR Skate Park, and a lot of us have cars here, so we're going to figure it out, I guess.
My workshop is called How to Localize, Decentralize, and Opt Out of the Matrix. And if you don't have the money, just come hit me up and we'll do it. We'll make it work.
All right, so yours is later at 4 o'clock. It's right after this.
Mine is at 3 o'clock and it's going to be here. And after that, it will be Derrick's down there.
Yeah, guys, so if you signed up for Max's workshop, we're going to get that set up now. Again, Derrick's is going to be at the park at 4, and Leah Thompson also has one that's going to be now, too, as well. So all those workshops are happening in the next 2 hours. And then we have Mark Passio's all day tomorrow at Poppy's. Thanks again, guys. FDR Skate Park is right down 20th Street. You can walk straight down 20th to the park and follow the curve until you get to the highway. You can't miss it. We're also going to be offering rides. Thanks again, guys. Have a great rest of your day, all right? See you later.